My daughter accused me of sabotage, but I was hiding a secret deadlier than any contract. The predator closing in on her company was already inside my fortress. The air in the mahogany-paneled study always felt heavy, thick with the unspoken history of my failures and triumphs. Tonight, it was suffocating. The only light came from the green-shaded banker's lamp illuminating the contracts spread across the antique desk, the very contracts that were now the battleground between me and the only person who mattered, my daughter, Alara. She stood opposite me, a vision of furious, inherited elegance. At 26, Alara had the sharp intelligence that always made me proud, and the volatile temper that had been my undoing in business more times than I cared to admit. Her eyes, usually the clear blue of glacial ice, were storm-darkened, fixed on the ledger with murderous intent. "Cruelty, Dad, that's what this is," she hissed, her voice trembling with carefully controlled rage. "You call this protection? You call locking away everything I've earned, everything I was promised, protection." I leaned back in my leather chair, the springs groaning softly under my weight, a sound that seemed offensively calm in the face of her outburst. I was 62, and I had spent a lifetime building this empire, this fortress around us. I had anticipated every threat except this one, the betrayal from within. "Alara, please lower your voice. We are discussing something highly sensitive." Sensitive? What's sensitive about denying me access to the funds that mature next month? The trust fund Father established for me at birth, which you, as executor, are now rewriting the terms of 2 weeks before I gain control? You didn't just adjust the stipulations, Dad. You put a clause in there that makes the entire principle inaccessible until you deem me financially mature. And you haven't even told me what that means. I closed the ledger, the snap echoing like a gunshot in the silence. I had rehearsed this conversation 1,000 times in my head over the last 6 months, preparing for anger, defiance, even tears. But I hadn't prepared for the utter conviction in her voice that I was deliberately trying to sabotage her future. "Alara, listen to me. This is not a punitive measure. It is a necessary delay. I would never knowingly harm you." "Oh, I believe you think you wouldn't harm me, but look at the result. My business launch, the entire seed money for Novatech, is contingent on that date. I have investors lined up. I have contracts ready to sign. And now I have to go back to them with my tail between my legs and tell them my father, the titan of industry, has decided his 26-year-old daughter is still playing with dolls?" Her laugh was sharp, brittle, devoid of humor. "You've ruined me before I even started, just to keep your hands on the reins a little longer." My jaw tightened. This was the moment. I had to tell her the truth, the ugly, terrifying truth I had carried alone for months. But I knew how it would sound coming from me, the man who had always managed crises by controlling the narrative. "The date hasn't changed, Alara. You will receive your principal. But the conditions have changed because the world has changed in ways you haven't noticed yet." I pushed a slim, unmarked manila folder across the desk toward her. It looked innocuous, just a beige folder, but I knew the weight of what was inside. "Look at that. Read the due diligence summary for Novatech." She hesitated, her eyes darting between the folder and my face, searching for the trick. She finally snatched it, her movements jerky with distrust, and flipped it open. She scanned the first page, a general overview of her proposed AI infrastructure startup. Then her expression began to shift. the anger receding, replaced by confusion, then a deep, unsettling furrow in her brow. This is standard risk assessment. Projected Q3 growth is high, yes, but there are minor liability flags concerning data harvesting protocols. Standard stuff for a Series A pitch. She looked up at me, bewildered. What am I missing? This looks positive. I leaned forward, my voice dropping to a near whisper, the confession tasting like ash on my tongue. You're missing the confidential addendum I had my internal security team run on your primary venture capitalist, Mr. Julian Vance. Alara, Vance isn't just an investor. He's a ghost. She scoffed, shaking her head dismissively. Dad, you're being paranoid. Vance is legitimate. He's funded 3 of the biggest unicorns in the last 5 years. He funded them right into the ground 6 months later after stripping the patents and liquidating the assets. Alara, he is not a venture capitalist. He's a corporate predator. And if you sign those contracts next month, if you give him access to Novatech's proprietary algorithms, he won't just take your company. He'll take everything your mother and I built because your technology will serve as the perfect Trojan horse. Her face went white, the color draining away so rapidly it looked like an old photograph being bleached. She flipped desperately through the rest of the folder, past the carefully compiled evidence of shell corporations, offshore transfers, and the alarming lack of verifiable personal history for Julian Vance. This can't be true. He was charming. He understood the architecture better than anyone I pitched to. That's his specialty, I said grimly. He mirrors passion. But Alara, the reason I've locked down your access isn't about teaching you a lesson about maturity. It's about time. I need 6 more weeks to finalize the countermeasures, to get the federal monitors involved discreetly, and to ensure that when Vance comes knocking for your technology, all he finds is a digital fortress that will lock him in and alert every regulatory body on the planet. She slammed the folder shut, her breath catching in her throat. The accusation of cruelty had evaporated, replaced by a dawning horror that mirrored my own. But if you're moving against him now, she whispered, her eyes wide with sudden understanding, and if he's as dangerous as this suggests, why did you let me schedule the final contract signing for next month? Why didn't you stop the process entirely when you found this out? I met her gaze, my own heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The weight of the last 6 months of secrecy finally crushed me, forcing the final, most dangerous piece of information past my lips. Because, Alara, Vance only believes the threat is real if the target, you, is positioned to deliver. He's not just waiting for the contract signing. He's expecting you to be desperate and exposed. He's watching every move you make right now. I couldn't warn you off the deal without alerting him that I knew his game. And worse, the documents show that Vance has already found a loophole in the original trust agreement. A loophole that allows him to seize control of the entire trust immediately if the primary beneficiary, you, fails to execute the terms of the preliminary agreements by the end of this fiscal quarter. Alara stared at the closed ledger, the ornate gold tooling reflecting the harsh light of the lamp, and then slowly, terribly, she looked back at me, her voice barely audible over the sudden rush of blood in my ears. What did you just say, Dad? What preliminary agreements? The silence that followed her question was absolute, a vacuum where sound should have been. It was the sound of a world tilting off its axis. I watched the subtle tremor start in her hands, the same tremor I used to see in my own father when he realized a hostile takeover had moved beyond the boardroom and into his personal life. The preliminary agreements. I repeated, my voice rougher than I intended. They are the innocuous paperwork you signed 6 months ago when Vance first approached you. The ones he insisted needed immediate notarization to demonstrate good faith before he invested the initial token funds to get Novatech off the ground. Alara stumbled back a step, her hand instinctively reaching for the back of the leather chair as if to steady herself against the sudden absence of solid ground beneath her feet. No, those were just NDAs, standard IP protection clauses. You reviewed those contracts, Dad. You told me they were boilerplate. I reviewed the public copies, I admitted, the word tasting like poison. This was the core of my sin, the calculated omission that had bought me time but had now cost me her trust entirely. Vance is a master of misdirection. He embedded the true seizure mechanism in a subsection titled Contingent Asset Transfer Protocol. It was cross-referenced in a document that required a separate, highly specialized legal review, which, frankly, I didn't have time to complete before you were set to meet him again. I pushed myself up from the chair, moving around the desk. I needed her to see my sincerity, to understand the narrow margin I had been operating within. Alara, I saw the red flags, but I couldn't act definitively without concrete proof of his criminal intent, which is why I needed those 6 weeks to get the SEC to move. I told you I was delaying your access to your trust to protect your business. That was only half the truth. The other half is that I needed you to keep signing Vance's paperwork, to keep him believing he was winning, while I built the cage around him. She recoiled slightly as I approached, maintaining a careful distance. The gulf between us felt wider than the desk. So you lied to me. You manipulated me into cooperating with the very man you claim is trying to ruin me, all under the guise of protection. How is that any different from what he's doing? Because my intention was to save you. His intention is to destroy you. I gripped the edge of the desk, leaning in close. Look at the timeline. Vance needed you committed by this quarter. He needed your signature on the final funding round. If you had pulled out earlier, if you had shown hesitation, he would have immediately triggered that contingent asset transfer protocol and taken control of Novatech and your entire personal fortune yesterday. I needed you to look eager, Alara. I needed you to be the perfect, slightly naive entrepreneur bringing him the feast. A terrifying realization flickered across her face. And the contracts I have scheduled for signing next month, the ones for the final tranche of investment, they are the trap, I confirmed, my voice heavy. They are the final trigger Vance is waiting for. Once you sign those, the asset transfer goes through, and the trust, the whole thing, everything your grandmother left, is his. That is why I froze your immediate liquid assets. It prevents Vance from seeing any financial instability on your part that might prematurely trigger his coup. She took a deep, shuddering breath, trying to process the layers of deceit and danger. So, the only thing standing between Vance and total financial control over my life is me not signing those final papers. Precisely. And that's why I need those 6 weeks. 6 weeks to get the legal ironclad so that when you stand there next month, you can smile, shake his hand, and then watch him realize he walked into a federal sting operation. The accusation was gone, replaced by a grim, cold focus. She looked down at the manila folder again, tracing the edge of the documents that detailed the ruin of a man she trusted. And if you can't get the legal structure set up in 6 weeks, if the federal monitors aren't ready? I hesitated. This was the answer I had been dreading giving, the contingency plan that felt like admitting defeat. then we have to make sure Vance thinks the signing is happening while covertly dissolving Novatech's structure so there's nothing left for him to seize. I ran a tired hand over my face. It means you walk away from the business you dreamed of, Alara, but you walk away solvent, safe. She looked up, the ice in her eyes now tempered with a terrifying clarity. So I have a choice. Ruin my future business or lose my entire inheritance, all because you withheld information and let me walk blindfolded toward a predator. Before I could respond, before I could explain the nuance of my desperation, a sharp, high-pitched chime echoed from the study's hidden intercom system, the one connected directly to the high-security external line, reserved only for emergencies or prearranged deep cover contacts. My heart lurched. I hadn't activated that line in years. I moved toward the speaker grill on the wall, my hand hovering over the activation button, a cold dread creeping up my spine. No one outside my trusted inner circle knew that line existed, let alone how to use it. "Who is that?" Alara demanded, rising to her feet. I keyed the button and the static cleared, replaced by a distorted, synthesized voice that cut through the tension like a razor. "Mr. Hawthorne, a simple courtesy call. Julian Vance sends his regards. He was quite impressed with your daughter's dedication to the preliminary agreements. He noted, however, that the final signing ceremony needs to be accelerated." My blood ran cold. Vance knew. He knew I was stalling. "He also mentioned," the synthesized voice continued, the modulation suddenly dropping out, revealing a smooth, familiar baritone, Vance's actual voice, chillingly close, "that he found your private security assessments regarding my financial history quite accurate. A shame you didn't trust me enough to share them sooner, Robert. Because while you were building your cage, I was simply changing the locks on your front door. I know you're in the study. Perhaps you should look away from the intercom, Robert. Look at the screen beside your desk. I've taken the liberty of sending you a small demonstration of my current control over your infrastructure." I whirled around, my eyes drawn against my will to the massive custom-built monitor displaying stock tickers and network diagnostics that dominated the far wall. The screen wasn't displaying my portfolio. It was displaying the live feed from the security camera pointed directly at Alara and me, currently framed in the desk light. But that wasn't the terror. As I watched, frozen, the feed flickered, and a new window opened, superimposed over the live image of my daughter. It was a simple line of code executing a single command, a command that began systematically wiping the encryption keys for my private offshore vaults. And beneath the command line, a chilling typed message flashed in bright red. "Signing accelerated. Meet me at the penthouse suite, 9 p.m. Come alone, Robert, or watch your legacy dissolve before dawn." The sight of my own security feed displaying my imminent financial execution was the ultimate violation. The red text burned into my retinas. "Meet me at the penthouse suite, 9 p.m. Come alone, Robert, or watch your legacy dissolve before dawn." It was 8:15 p.m. Vance hadn't just bypassed my firewalls. He had walked right through them, using my own security protocols against me. He hadn't needed 6 weeks. He'd needed only the time it took me to confess my plan to Alara. Alara saw the message, her breath catching in a sharp, painful gasp. The color that had slowly returned to her cheeks drained away instantly. She looked from the monitor displaying the digital carnage to me, the accusation of misplaced protection returning tenfold, now laced with terror for our shared future. "He knew everything," she whispered, backing away slowly toward the door, her mind clearly racing through escape scenarios I hadn't even allowed myself to consider. He let you think you were playing a game. He was just waiting for the final pieces of leverage. The final piece of leverage is you, Alara, I ground out, already moving toward the hidden compartment behind the portrait of my late wife, fumbling for the encrypted satellite phone. He needs me cornered, desperate, and most importantly, isolated. That's why he stipulated, "Come alone." "And you're going to go?" Her voice cracked with disbelief. "You're going to walk into his trap? After everything you just told me about how dangerous he is?" "I have to go. If I don't, he wipes the vaults, and then he comes for the information on his own criminal activity, the information I have stored right here, on the network he's currently dismantling." I pulled out the burner phone, its cold plastic familiar in my shaking hand. "If I'm not back by midnight, Alara, you take the burner phone, you transfer the entire Novatech data package, the one detailing Vance's entire operation, to the FBI contact listed on the emergency sheet. You do not call the police yourself. You do not call any other contact. You send the data, and then you run." "Run where? Dad, this is insane. We have to call for backup. We can fight this together." She moved toward me, desperation overriding caution. I caught her wrist, gripping it perhaps too tightly, channeling all my frantic energy into making her understand the absolute necessity of obedience. No backup. Vance has clearly penetrated the local networks. He might even have eyes inside the precinct. Any move we make together will be seen as a direct challenge, and he will liquidate us both instantly. Going alone is the only chance I have to buy you time. I threw the burner phone onto the desk next to the damning manila folder. When you see the time hit 9:15 and you haven't heard from me, that's your cue. You get out of the house. You don't contact anyone. You survive. The clock on the wall, a magnificent antique grandfather clock that had ticked through my entire adulthood, began to chime the quarter hour. Bong. Bong. 8:15. 15 minutes until I walked into the jaws of the beast. Alara snatched the burner phone, her eyes blazing with a mixture of fear and resolve. "And what about the trust fund? If he takes the vaults, the terms of the fund collapse entirely, right? The whole protection scheme fails." I nodded grimly. "He wins everything." "Then I'm not going to let you go alone to fight a war that started because of my contracts," she declared, her youthful indignation finally hardening into the steel of a survivor. "If he needs leverage, I'll give him different leverage. He wants the company? Fine. But he's not getting it for free, and he's certainly not getting it without dealing with the collateral damage he created." She spun around, grabbing the manila folder containing Vance's incriminating file. Before I could stop her, she had inserted a single, highly sensitive, encrypted data chip, the master backup of Novatech's core AI architecture, the one I'd insisted she keep off the main servers, into the port on the burner phone. "If you're going to distract him, Dad, I'm going to hit him where it hurts most right now," she hissed, her fingers flying across the phone's interface, preparing the mass data dump to the preset FBI recipient. "He thinks he's crippled my company. I'm going to show him what a truly desperate executive can do when they have nothing left to lose." "Alara, wait! You can't release that data. It ties Novatech directly to proprietary defense algorithms we developed in partnership with the DoD 5 years ago. If that leaks before the SEC clears the partnership structure, it's not just financial ruin, it's treason." I lunged for the phone, but she was too quick, her eyes fixed on the screen with a frightening focus. "He shouldn't have cornered me, Dad," she snarled, her thumb hovering over the final execution key. "I'm sending the proof of his fraud and the proof of our classified involvement simultaneously. Let the government decide who to bury first. And then The grandfather clock struck the half hour. Bong, bong, 8:30. Too late to stop her. She hit the send button just as I tackled her, sending both of us sprawling onto the Persian rug. The burner phone skittered across the polished wood floor, the confirmation message flashing briefly. Data transmission complete. A second later, the lights in the study, all the power in the house, died instantly, plunging us into absolute blackness, save for the faint, red glow emanating from the monitor across the room, which was still displaying the live feed of the empty rug where we had just been. A new, synthesized voice, colder and more measured than Vance's, echoed from the room's integrated sound system, overriding the previous connection. It wasn't Vance. It was someone new, someone who had been monitoring the room, waiting for the precise moment of maximum chaos. Mr. Hawthorne, Miss Hawthorne, your unsanctioned data transmission has been intercepted at the ISP gateway. Thank you for making the investigation so efficient for us. We require the hardware that processed the transmission immediately. Please place the device on the desk and step away slowly. This is not Mr. Vance you are dealing with now. This is regulatory compliance. The sudden, absolute darkness was a physical blow, momentarily robbing me of breath and orientation. The only illumination was that hellish, predatory red glow from the monitor across the room, casting long, distorted shadows that danced with the implied movement of an unseen enemy. Regulatory compliance. The words were sterile, official, and infinitely more terrifying than Vance's theatrical threats. Vance wanted money and power. This new entity wanted control, silence, and the classified data Alara had just unleashed. I scrambled up from the floor, pulling Alara behind me, putting my body between her and the sound source. My mind was a terrifying kaleidoscope of flashing consequences. Vance's fraud exposed, the DoD algorithms compromised, and now federal operatives, or worse, Black Ops contractors, on site, responding to the digital scream Alara's hasty upload had generated. Alara, the phone. Where is the phone? I whispered urgently into the suffocating dark. It slid toward the fireplace, she managed, her voice tight with adrenaline. The new voice, clinical, devoid of emotion, spoke again, louder this time, seemingly originating from the doorway. The device is not necessary for us, Mr. Hawthorne. We already possess the necessary decryption keys. We simply require the individual who accessed them. Cooperation is mandatory. I knew this game. Federal agencies didn't usually announce their presence with a synthesized voice and an immediate power cut unless they were operating outside standard jurisdiction, or Vance had already secured a very powerful shield. It's a trap, Alara. That's not compliance. That's a cleanup crew. I barked, knowing I had seconds. My hand found the hidden compartment again, not for the satellite phone, but for the heavy, reassuring weight of the Sig Sauer P2, 2.6 I kept secured behind the portrait. As my fingers closed around the cold steel, the emergency lighting along the hallway, lights I had installed myself, linked to a totally independent circuit, flickered on, bathing the room in a sickly, weak orange glow. Standing framed in the doorway, surrounded by the shadows, were three figures in tactical black gear. They weren't wearing standard FBI jackets. They looked military or paramilitary. They held weapons trained steadily on us, weapons that looked far too serious for a simple corporate audit. Robert Hawthorne, the central figure stated, his voice amplified by a mask-mounted speaker, utterly flat. You are in violation of National Security Protocols 41B and 77G, Release the girl and surrender the storage media immediately. Alara let out a small, panicked whimper, realizing the full, catastrophic scope of her retaliatory strike. "They're too fast," I muttered to her, positioning myself fully in front of her. They must have had an agent monitoring the ISP gateway, waiting for the package upload to confirm Vance's involvement. I pulled the Sig Sauer free, the metallic sound of the slide racking back, echoing unnervingly in the small room. "Compliance will be achieved by force if necessary," the lead operative warned, raising his rifle slightly. "Compliance is getting boring," I snapped back, aiming the pistol not at them, but toward the window overlooking the city skyline. "You want the data? Go get it from the server room, because what you just intercepted was junk code designed to lure you out." It was a bluff, a desperate gamble to buy us an exit strategy. But the tactical team hesitated, their internal protocols momentarily confused by the denial of the primary objective. That split second was all I needed. I didn't fire at the door. I fired twice, rapid, deafening cracks, at the thick, insulated glass of the picture window overlooking the 100-foot drop. The reinforced glass spider-webbed violently but held. "The stairwell! Now!" I yelled to Alara, grabbing her hand and hauling her toward the far wall. The wall with the secret door leading to the rarely used dumbwaiter shaft that connected the study to the detached garage below. The operatives reacted instantly, flooding the doorway. The air filled with the sharp, acrid smell of gunpowder and the whirring clicks of safety mechanisms being disengaged. "Breach!" one shouted. I slammed my shoulder against the ornate bookcase, triggering the release mechanism for the dumbwaiter panel. The heavy oak swung inward with a groan, revealing the dusty, narrow shaft. "Go! Down!" I shoved Alara hard into the opening. She stumbled, grasping for the metal cables inside. As she began her terrified descent, I turned back toward the armed men pouring into the study. I raised the Sig Sauer, knowing I couldn't stop 3 trained professionals. But perhaps I could slow them enough for Alara to make it to the garage level where her emergency transport was hidden. I fired a third, desperate shot toward the ceiling fixture, hoping the shrapnel might dislodge something crucial. The overhead light shattered, plunging the room back into the limited orange glow of the hall lamps. The lead operative didn't flinch. He leveled his weapon at my chest. "Last chance, Hawthorne." I held his gaze, an odd sense of peace washing over me. I had bought her the time she needed. Tell Vance he lost the game when he underestimated a desperate father. Just as the operative squeezed the trigger, the sound of heavy, grinding metal erupted from the dumbwaiter shaft. Not Alara struggling to descend, but the mechanism being deliberately overloaded from below. The metal cables Alara was holding snapped with a sound like a cannon blast, and the entire carriage, with Alara inside, dropped like a stone into the darkness of the shaft, the sound of the impact muffled by layers of concrete and insulation. Then, silence returned, broken only by the soft, rhythmic clicking of the lead operative's rifle, now locked onto me, the mechanism ready to fire. "The girl is contained," the operative stated calmly into his comms, "but she just sent a massive data packet to an external server. Confirm interception status." A moment passed. The tension was so thick I could taste copper. Then a voice, high-pitched, panicked, and definitely not the synthesized regulator, cut through the tactical comms crackling with static. "Negative, Command. The package bypassed the gateway filter. It went clean through. It's propagating. The DoD classification, it's live. I repeat, the classified defense algorithms are live on the open net." The operative staring down the barrel of my gun froze. his training momentarily overridden by sheer disbelief. He slowly lowered his weapon, his masked head snapping toward his wrist-mounted display. And then, the entire room plunged into darkness once more, a total, complete power failure that killed the hallway lights, the tactical team's comms, and the red glow of the monitoring screen. In the ensuing, echoing blackness, a new sound began, a sound I hadn't heard since I was a child visiting the massive military base near my father's old office. It was the distinctive, high-pitched, oscillating whine of a citywide emergency broadcast system activating, the sound of national attention being focused on us. The sudden total blackout was my final victory, though it felt like the prelude to my execution. The oscillating whine of the emergency broadcast system was agonizingly loud, an auditory signature that meant the data Alara released hadn't just reached a local FBI desk, it had triggered a national security alert. Vance's corporate predator game had escalated instantly into a crisis of state. The tactical team, stripped of their lights and communication, were momentarily paralyzed, their training momentarily useless against the sudden environmental failure. They were reliant on their tech. I was relying on muscle memory and desperation. "Alara!" I roared into the darkness, ignoring the armed men completely. I had to know if she survived that catastrophic drop. Silence. Only the piercing electronic wail answered me. I didn't wait. Shoving the Sig Sauer back into its holster, I bolted toward the dumbwaiter shaft. I knew the layout of the garage below by heart. There was a reinforced utility door that led directly to the service alley, far from the main gate where Vance's initial surveillance would be focused. As I reached the edge of the open shaft, a figure lunged at my back. One of the black-clad operatives, perhaps sensing the escape route. I didn't have time to turn. I dropped low, pivoting, and drove my elbow upward, catching the man sharply under the chin. There was a sickening, wet crack, and he went limp, collapsing halfway into the shaft, his heavy rifle clattering against the metal guides. I swung my legs over the edge, ignoring the burning scent of gunpowder and the shouts of the remaining operatives trying to regain situational awareness. I slid down the greasy metal cables, ignoring the painful abrasion on my hands, focusing only on the sound of Alara's impact below. When my feet hit the concrete floor of the garage, I felt a sickening jolt, but it was followed by a weak, familiar sound. "Dad? I'm here." I fumbled along the floor until my hand found the cool plastic of the burner phone. It was still emitting a faint, almost dead glow. I snatched it up. No signal, but the screen confirmed. Data transmission successful. Recipients notified. "Alara, are you hurt?" "My arm. I think it's broken, but I landed on the hydraulics casing. I'm alive. The service door. Can you open it?" she whispered, her voice strained. The tactical team's comms were beginning to flicker back to life above us, their static-laced shouts turning into organized commands. They were regaining composure. I found the manual release for the heavy garage door. It was a steel wheel, stiff from years of disuse. I put my entire weight into it, my muscles screaming in protest as the heavy mechanism began to grind open against the emergency lockdown Vance had initiated. Just as the gap widened enough for a person to slip through, a beam of blinding white light pierced the gloom, followed by the sound of heavy boots thundering down the external stairs. They hadn't just been monitoring the data, they had anticipated the escape route. I pushed Alara through the gap. "Go! Run to the north perimeter wall. The car is waiting. Don't look back." She hesitated, clutching her arm, her eyes huge in the faint light filtering from the alley. "What about you?" "I'm the diversion," I said, pulling the Sig Sauer free again. I stepped back into the center of the garage, directly under the heavy, exposed wiring of the main power junction box. I looked up at the chaotic tangle of high-voltage cables that supplied the entire estate. "The cruelty wasn't freezing your money, Alara," I confessed, my voice ringing with finality. "The cruelty was knowing that if I went down, I had to make sure Vance and anyone working for him went down harder. This whole empire? It was wired to fail spectacularly if I ever lost control." I didn't wait for her reply. I raised the pistol one last time, aiming not at the approaching figures now flooding the garage entrance, but straight up at the junction box. "Tell them I protected you," I managed, before pulling the trigger. The roar of the Sig Sauer was instantly drowned out by the deafening, blinding explosion as the high-caliber round ripped through the main conduit. A shower of sparks erupted, followed by the terrifying sound of raw electrical current surging and overloading. The entire estate went dead silent, not just dark, but dead. The tactical team stopped mid-stride, bathed in the momentary blinding flash of cascading electrical fire. The last thing I saw, before the wave of darkness and heat consumed me, was Alara's silhouette, a fleeting shadow of hope, disappearing into the night alleyway, running toward the future I had violently, perhaps fatally, secured for her. I had shielded her from the wolves by setting fire to the entire forest, hoping she could navigate the ashes to safety.